At the end of this topic, you will be able to define what ecosystem is, identify the types of ecosystem, explain the components in an ecosystem, describe the pond ecosystem, analyze the flow of energy in an ecosystem, distinguish the food chain from food web, state how the ecosystem is balanced by nature, conclude the ways and means to maintain the balanced ecosystem. A community of organisms that interact with one another and with the environment is called an ecosystem. The ecosystem is of two types, namely aquatic and terrestrial. Pond ecosystem is the best example for aquatic ecosystem. A pond is a quiet body of water without much wave action and nominal temperature from top to bottom, and its ecosystem runs smoothly with an interaction between biotic and abiotic factors.
Forest ecosystem. Forest is the home of many flora and fauna. In a forest, there is a lot of grass, which is a producer. The deer, which is a herbivore, consumes the grass. Lions, in turn, consume these deer. Lions are called carnivores.
Ponds get their energy from the sun. Other abiotic factors which control the pond ecosystem are light, temperature, pH, inorganic substances like CO2, H2, O2, N, PO4, CO3 and S, and organic substances like carbohydrates, proteins and lipids. A biotic factor includes producers, consumers and decomposers. Plants are the primary producers. Producers are hydrophytes like Hydrilla, Vallisneria, etc. and phytoplankton like Chlamydomonas, Volvox and Spirogyra. Zooplanktons like insects, larvae of dragonfly consume the phytoplankton, which is considered as primary consumers or herbivores. There are certain fishes, frogs, water beetles, etc. which feed on the primary consumers, and they are known as secondary consumers in the pond. Some big fishes and kingfishers that feed on small fishes act as tertiary consumers. Several bacteria and fungi form the strata of decomposers which decompose the dead and debris of producers and consumers and enrich the nutrients in the pond. Energy flows through an ecosystem in one direction which looks like a pyramid. At the base of an ecosystem, primary producers are actively converting solar energy into stored chemical energy. The next are primary consumers which obtain energy by eating the producers. The next layer is the secondary consumers which eat primary consumers. There is another layer of consumers which eat secondary consumers called tertiary consumers. The energy gets decreased when it moves to the next level. An ecosystem is balanced by nature. A balanced ecosystem has equilibrium in biotic and abiotic factors and functions efficiently. An ecosystem maintains the balance between the number of resources and the number of users, or the balance between prey and predators. For example, there is a balance between resources like a banana tree and monkeys. If the banana trees stop growing, the monkeys won't get bananas. If there is no snakes, mice population increases in the fields which will completely erode the crops. Food chain is a linear sequence of link between one level of organisms to the next level through which energy is transferred in one direction. Food chain in a grassland ecosystem shows how different living organisms are dependent on another species for their food requirements. Grassland is defined as a large open space filled with grass. A typical food chain in a grassland shows that energy derived from the sun moves to grass in the name of photosynthesis, then to the grasshopper, then to the frog, who is a primary consumer, which in turn is eaten up by snakes, who is a secondary consumer, and then eaten up by a hawk.
Food chain in grasslands. The movement of energy transfer from one level to the next level in a given ecosystem is called the food chain. It shows how different living organisms are dependent on other species in an ecosystem for their food requirements. A grassland is defined as a large open space filled with grass. A grassland ecosystem mainly hosts grazing animals and herds. The flow of energy from producers to consumers is clearly explained in the food chain in the grasslands. Let us see an example of food chain in grasslands. The image explains the process of the food chain in a grassland ecosystem. The flow of energy in the food chain is shown by the red arrows. Energy enters an ecosystem in the form of heat from the sun. This energy is absorbed by organisms such as plants and is then converted to other forms of energy and stored. Once stored, energy is used for necessary life functions such as growth, movement, and reproduction. The living organisms of a grassland ecosystem can be classified as producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers are organisms which can prepare their own food from simple inorganic substances like carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight. They are also called as autotrophs. Examples of producers are green plants including algae. Consumers are organisms that consume plant and/or animal material to gain their energy for growth and activity. All animals are consumers. Animals which get their food by eating producers directly are called as primary consumers or herbivores. Rats, rabbits are examples of primary consumers. Animals which get their food by eating primary consumers are called secondary consumers or carnivores. Snakes, wildcats, etc. are examples of secondary consumers. Animals which get their food by eating secondary consumers are called tertiary consumers or carnivores. Owls, peacocks, kites, etc. are examples of tertiary consumers. When a producer or a consumer dies, decomposers that include bacteria, fungi, insects, and algae break down or decompose the dead material of its body into nutrient substances. They are very useful in bringing back the nutrients to the soil. In this way, the nutrients that have been taken from the soil are recycled. Bacteria, viruses, and fungi are therefore called as decomposers.
The food chains are interlinked to form food webs. In food web, every component of the ecosystem is connected to one another.
Food web. A food web is a network of interrelated food chains in a given area. Each step or level of the food chain forms a trophic level. The autotrophs or the producers are at the first trophic level. The herbivores or the primary consumers are at the second trophic level. Small carnivores or the secondary consumers are at the third trophic level, and larger carnivores or the tertiary consumers form the fourth trophic level. Thus, a food web maintains the stability of an ecosystem. All organisms which can prepare their own food by photosynthesis, like the green plants due to the presence of chlorophyll, are called producers. Animals such as deer, grasshoppers, and rabbits that eat only plants are called herbivores. They are also known as primary consumers. Animals such as frogs, snakes, and foxes that eat the flesh of other animals are called carnivores. They are also known as secondary consumers. Animals such as owl, peacock, eagle, and lion which feed on secondary consumers are called tertiary consumers.
Disturbing any one factor in an ecosystem could affect the living conditions of organisms, which results in an imbalance. Removal of trees and vegetation would affect both land and water ecosystems, as there will be no food for organisms. Killing animals for our interest, polluting land, air and water disturb the balance in nature. There should be a recycling of nutrients, minerals and water to maintain the eco-balance in an ecosystem. Careful use of natural resources will maintain the eco-balance. Maintenance of biogeochemical cycle has great impact on proper eco-balance.
In this topic, you have learned
A community of organisms that interact with one another and with the environment is called an ecosystem, and it is of two types, namely aquatic and terrestrial. Abiotic and biotic factors are the two major components in ecosystem, in which abiotic covers air, water, temperature, rainfall, etc., and biotic factors cover the producers, consumers, and decomposers. In a pond ecosystem, energy flows from the sun and gets decreased when transferred from producers, which are phytoplanktons, to zooplanktons, which are herbivores, to small fishes, which are secondary consumers, to large fishes, which are tertiary carnivores. Bacteria and fungi play a vital role of decomposing the dead and debris to enrich the nutrients. Food chain is a linear sequence of link between one level of organisms to next level through which energy is transferred in one direction, but in food web all the food chains are interlinked. An ecosystem is balanced by nature, but removal of trees and vegetation, killing the animals etc. affects it, and this can be overcome by us by maintaining the biogeochemical cycles, recycling of nutrients, minerals and water etc.